So, today we all come into the temple here at the Buddhist Maha Vihara, and we've taken 8 precepts. So, why do we take the precepts? We don't take precepts just because it's something that we do when we come to the temple. If we just come to the temple and we take 5 precepts or 8 precepts because it's what we do, then it's what we call rites and rituals. The precepts have to have some meaning to them. So we take the precepts to remind us of how to live as morally well as we could possibly hope to live. And of course you don't have to be Buddhist to live a moral lifestyle, you know. In fact, you don't actually have to take precepts to live a moral lifestyle, but the precepts are a good way to remind us. And I know that in many Buddhist countries, the lay people will take precepts on a daily basis. They don't necessarily come and sit in front of a monk and request to be given the 5 precepts, but many people will get up in the morning and they will naturally take the 5 precepts as a reminder of the lifestyle that we should be attempting at least to try and keep. So, as I say, precepts, they're not just something that we come into the temple and we, it's got to mean something. You know, we have to take these words on board. We have to get these words into our heart, because they're not just some sort of magic words that will get us into heaven or something like that, you know. These words are a reminder. And you know, a lot of people, I know in the West, a lot of people think that, the precepts are something that we don't need to take seriously. You know, there's the big argument, you know, in the Christian church. The Christian church has some very strict rules. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not commit adultery. They're very, very black and white. Thou shalt not. Thou shalt not. Thou shalt not. And of course in the West we like to say that Buddhism is wonderful because there's no thou shalt nots. There's just a whole bunch of it's probably best if you don't. Because, you know, their training rules, you know, so it says, I undertake the training rule to refrain from killing, for instance. So they say it's only a training rule and it's okay to break it. But that's actually playing with the precepts. It's not taking the precepts seriously. So, when we look at the precepts, I mean, today we've taken 8 precepts. Normally we would take 5 precepts. So, when we look at the first 4 precepts, for a start, these are all about non-harming of others. Not only people, of course, animals, all this sort of thing. Even mosquitoes, you know. And I know that's a hard one here in Malaysia at the moment. I know here at least here in Kuala Lumpur, we've got dengue fever. And I believe up in Penang they've got Japanese, this is going to be encephalitis or something like that, you know. And so of course, you know, people say, well, isn't it better to kill the mosquito than to let the mosquito kill others? And that's a tough one. That's a really tough one, you know. So although we might say I'm killing the mosquito in order to preserve human life, there's still an intention to kill. And so we have to be very, very careful with that one. We can buy sprays that we can put on ourselves. They stink a bit, but we can still put them on and the mosquitoes won't come and suck our blood. I remember once in Thailand, and living in the forest, and I was fascinated because I put on some eucalyptus oil, and you could see the mosquitoes coming, and they'd come about this close to me, and they'd take off. They didn't like the smell of that eucalyptus at all. So there was no need for me to actually kill the mosquitoes, you know. These mosquito coils we get, which stink like anything. We all know what those things are like in the house. They're absolutely horrible. But the mozzies don't like them. It doesn't kill the mosquito, but it certainly sends it away. And actually the other day somebody told me that here in Malaysia you can buy some form of lemongrass. It's not your ordinary lemongrass, it's some other lemongrass. So if you put a couple of those plants in your house, you won't have any mozzies, you know. And so even with mosquitoes, we don't actually need to actively go out and kill them. And so we look at the first precept, but we tend to take it a step further, the first precept, because we tend to say to abstain from harming other beings, you know. So when you come home from work and you're not in a very good mood, you don't kick the cat, you know. The cat didn't do anything to you, you know, and the cat doesn't particularly want to be kicked, you know. So we think, well, you know, I wouldn't be happy if somebody kicked or slapped me, so I really shouldn't go kicking the cat, shouldn't kick the dog, you know. We need to learn how to not harm. I remember sitting in a temple once. We were doing chanting, evening chanting, and all the novices sat behind the monks. And all during the chanting I could hear the slapping sound going on, you know. And at the end of the chanting I turned around, all these novices had little piles of mosquitoes. And they were counting them up, doing a tally to see who'd managed to kill more mosquitoes than the others. And I'm like sitting there going, no, that's just wrong, you know. And I've seen monks sitting there with those, you get those things, they look like a tennis racket. They're electrical. And I've seen monks sitting there outside their kuti. You know, it's like, no, you're not supposed to do that, you know. And so the first precept, it's all about physically harming other beings. Now, of course, occasionally we kill a mosquito by accident. It can't be helped. There's no intention there. You know, you're sitting there and you just feel something. And, you know what we're like. It feels a bit funny on the arm, and you go to give it a bit of, and you realise you've just squished the mozzie. Well, that's unintentional killing, you know. And this is something that we really need to be aware of. I had somebody ask me one day, they said we've got no chance of getting out of samsara because we kill all of the time. So when we drive our car, bugs splat on the windscreen. They get caught in the radiator. And I explained to them that this is unintentional killing. People say, well, what about when I mow the lawn? Unintentional killing. When you get the lawnmower out, you don't get the lawnmower out thinking to yourself, I'm going to kill thousands and thousands of little critters. You get the lawnmower out thinking, I'm going to cut the grass. That's your intention. The intention is to cut the lawn. And you go for a drive in the car, the intention is to get from point A to point B. There's no intent to kill. And so it's intentional action. We think about killing. So even with the mosquito, you know, when you find yourself sitting there and you know, there's the mosquito and you're trying to get your hands to either side, there's a lot of intention there, you know, you're trying to get your hands positioned ready for the, you know, that's intent. And it is a killing. And we have to be very careful, you know, because some people tell me that mosquitoes aren't sentient. I would disagree with them, you know, and so we do our best not to kill. Now, when we've taken 8 precepts, you're pushing yourself towards the monastic lifestyle. Now, so that would mean today you should do no gardening. Because when we turn the soil, we kill. Although there's no intention to kill, we try a little bit harder when we're on the 8 precepts. If you look at the monk's rules, a monk is forbidden in the Vinaya to turn the soil. That's why you don't see monks planting trees. It's not that we've got anything against tree planting, but when we start to dig in the ground, we turn the ground over and we take creatures that are normally living under the ground and we place them up on the surface, and they can't survive in the sunlight. We take creatures that are supposed to be living on the surface and we bury them under the ground. So although it's unintentional, this is why a monk is not allowed to turn the soil, because he's aware of the fact that he can actually be killing. So we try not to do it. And so it would be the same with lay people. I would suggest that we don't do any gardening on the day that we take the 8 precepts. The second one is the rule of training, not to take what isn't given. Now, of course, we all know what stealing is. But even with this one, we've got this thing, we go to work and we think it's okay to take the pen home. Unless your boss says it's okay to take the company pen home, or some paper clips or whatever, it's actually taking what hasn't been given. When we do cash jobs so that we don't have to pay tax, it's stealing. Now I know we can argue that the government's stealing from us, but we're still supposed to pay our taxes. That's the law of the land, says that we have to pay our taxes. And so even though I believe they're introducing GST here in Malaysia, is that right? They're starting to put a GST tax on things. If we got that in New Zealand, we call it grab, steal and take. But we have no choice, we have to pay it. I think we pay 15% GST, and we have to pay it. And so a lot of people, when they do cash jobs, they're not only not paying tax, but they're not paying their GST, so it's kind of like a double theft. And just while we're here, just a little point. Often you people, you come and you're serving food to the monks in the morning or at lunchtime. And we have a plate, and you come around and you ask, would we like this? Yes please, thank you very much. But often in front of us there's a plate of fruit. Now, some monks won't touch that plate of fruit unless you actually physically offer it to them. The Vinaya actually does forbid us from taking that fruit from the table. Because it's on the table and because it's sitting in front of us, we're not allowed to assume that it's ours. The only thing that a monk is allowed to take without asking is water. And so, although some of the monks will take it anyway, it's on the table. But you may find that there are some monks who are a bit hesitant to take that plate of fruit. So if you come, you see that the plate in front of them is empty, and you go and collect that plate, you can offer them the other plate, because a monk, if he was really strictly living according to the Vinaya, he would not touch the fruits on that plate until it had been offered. And so, as I say, taking what's not given, it covers so many different things, that even if you go to the shop and they give you the incorrect change, if you don't realise they've given you the incorrect change, that's fine. But if when they're handing the change out to you and you're thinking, oh, that's 5 ringgit more than I should have got back, that's taking. although it was given, it wasn't given intentionally, it was accidentally given out to you. And so even when you get the extra change, as much as it hurts you, because I know the grocery bills can be quite expensive, you should give the money back, you know. And so that's the next one that we have to look at is being very careful about what it is that we're receiving, what it is that we're taking home, because we can be breaking the precepts. I'm not quite sure how your food is served out to you here. I don't think you have to go quite as strict as the monks. But as I said, with that food that's on the table, if anybody's serving food out, if they can remember to try and offer it to some of the monks, because although, as I say, some might take it because it's on the table and generally speaking would accept that it's been offered. Technically speaking, it wasn't. It's never been received into the monk's hands directly from a person who's giving the Dhamma. And so we can remember to do that. It might just help some of the other monks. But then again, I've seen some of the monks just reach forward and take a piece of chapati. So they're not all going to be worried if you don't offer it. They'll take it anyway, no problem. The third rule, undertake the rule of training to refrain from unchaste behaviour. This has changed from the 5 precepts. You know, the 5 precepts tell us that I refrain from any sort of sexual misconduct. And we all know, playing around, if you've got a partner, if you're married, then you're supposed to be faithful to your partner, And then of course we know all the other terrible things that go on in the world, rape, paedophilia. Of course the Vinaya talks of, women being still under the supervision of their parents, under the supervision of kings, or all this sort of stuff. Which I guess in many ways probably in today's language would mean people who are not of an age to be allowed to legally consent. So we have to be very careful with that one. But when we take the 8 precepts, it's a vow of celibacy for the 24-hour period, for the day and the night period. And that includes not doing the laundry by hand, if you get what I mean. There's no self-stimulation allowed either under this particular rule. But you can see, like, when it comes to the stealing, when we steal from people, it harms other people. And we know that we wouldn't like to be stolen from, And so we think, well, I wouldn't want people to steal from me, so why should I steal from other people? Same with sexual immorality. You don't want your partner to play up, so what gives you the right to play up? And actually, sexual immorality, when we're looking at it from just the aspect of the 5 precepts, there's so much more harm than just a partner playing the field on another partner. Because what happens is you get found out. It's possible that 2 marriages or 2 partnerships get broken up. There are children involved often in these partnerships. And these children go through all sorts of traumas when their parents break up. A lot of the time the children blame themselves for the breakup of the family, although it had nothing to do with them. And so we can see that we can cause so much harm when we do this sort of thing. The 4th one, to refrain from, we often say to refrain from lying, but it's to refrain from harsh speech, divisive speech, lying and gossip. So there's about 4 different types of speech involved here. So we all know what harsh speech is, swearing at people, even calling people stupid. I'm always horrified when I see parents do it to their children, in front of other people. Why are you so stupid? That causes so much harm to a child. A child actually grows up believing that it's thick and that it will never become anything in life, you know. And so we have to be very, very careful of harsh speech. Then there's divisive speech. Divisive speech is when you deliberately try to drive a wedge between people who are friends, for instance. You know, so you start saying, oh, you know, this one's this and this one's that, and you start to tell stories just to try and push two friends apart for whatever reason that people like to push friends apart, you know. And we even see it in our communities these days. I was thinking the other day of the situation in Sri Lanka. For so long, the Muslim and the Buddhist people of Sri Lanka lived in harmony. And now there's a group of people are dividing them. You know, and they're using all sorts of trickery and treachery to say that this particular group did this, and the others are going, this particular group did that. And now we're seeing violence being acted out on the streets of Sri Lanka in certain areas where we have Buddhists fighting the Muslims, and the Muslims trying to take revenge on the Buddhists. And this is a society that for so long lived side by side in harmony. You know, most of the butcher shops in Sri Lanka are owned by Muslims because the Buddhists won't do any killing. So they're able to go to the butcher shop and buy their meat because they didn't kill the meat. You know, this is people cooperating with one another. The island that I was on in Thailand last time, predominantly it's a Muslim island, you know, and there's a lot of resorts, guest houses, whatever you want to call them, and you see the Muslims and the Thais working side by side, you know, running the businesses. And sometimes you'll see some of these guest houses, these hotels, and they're owned by Muslims, but they've got a bar. But the Thais actually have the bar. The Thais rent the space from the Muslims, and they have the bar, and they serve the alcohol. While the Muslims don't have to serve the alcohol. But having the alcohol there can actually help them to have guests in there to eat their dinner, eat their lunch and stuff like that. So there's this cooperation that's taking place. And it's a really, really beautiful thing to see, you know, and it would be terrible for somebody to come in and start to be divisive on that island and to force a wedge between the Muslim people and the Buddhist people, you know. And so we have to watch out for divisiveness. Now, lying, we pretty much know what lying's all about, you know. And there are people who would say that sometimes it's okay to lie. And actually, I can't really argue with that situation. I often think back to the Second World War in Europe. And, you know, you had the Germans who were trying to wipe out people like the Jews, people like the gypsies. And I think to myself, well, if you were living in an occupied country in Europe and you knew where a Jewish family was being hidden, and the SS came and said to you, do you know where any Jews might be hiding? I actually think in that instance it's okay to lie, you know. It's still a lie. The intention is still to lie. But I think the intention behind that is a noble intention. Because if you say, no, I don't know, then you stop the Gestapo, the SS or whoever, you stop them from actually taking people away and killing them. So you've looked after the karma of those who would have killed the Jews. You've also helped the Jewish people. So I do think that there are certain occasions where a lie might be okay. But we still have to understand we're lying. No matter what, we're still lying. But I don't think the consequences of that kind of a lie would be as serious as some other lies that we might tell, you know. It's like, you know, when you're little kids and you break something, so you blame your brother or your sister. It wasn't me. Or you blame the dog. I was always lucky we had dogs and cats, so I could always blame the dogs and the cats for whatever it was that took place. But we do it quite often. You see it at work. You know, two people going for a promotion, and they both want that promotion, and so they can start telling untruths about one another to make them look bad in front of the boss, you know, so that we get the job, we get the pay rise, we get the company car, we get the flexi hours, you know. So normally when we're lying for our own benefit, and we're lying to put somebody else down. And so that's fairly straightforward, so you know we need to watch out for false speech. Then the next one is gossip. Don't we all just love a bit of a gossip, eh? You know, these conversations that start off, oh, I'm not one to gossip, but, you know, and so I don't like listening to gossip. No, what you do, you know? Oh, we love a bit of gossip, you know. Gossip makes the world go round, you know. But gossip can be so harmful to people. You know, I remember seeing a thing recently where I think it happened in the States, and some people put something up, you know, I don't know, on Twitter or Facebook, something like that, and saying that, you know, some young fellow who's only about 14 was gay, you know, and then there was all this bullying took place because everybody saw this on Facebook and they started to really give this guy a hard time. So he killed himself, you know. I don't know if he was gay or not, but he couldn't handle the gossip that was being spread. And what a terrible thing. A young fellow, 14 years old. And we often see cases of this where people are gossiped and bullied on these social forums. And we do have young people harming themselves, you know, people killing themselves because of what's being said about them. You know, and this is just vicious gossip. And so many times the gossip is untrue. You know, somebody heard something and then they've gone and repeated it to somebody else. And when they repeat it, they tend to add little bits all the time. You know, it's not enough just to give the straight story as you heard it, you know. And it goes on and on and on and on and on. And it does, it really, really hurts people. You know? And we can get so entwined in gossip, you know, we look out for it. There was a site back in New Zealand. It was a Facebook page, and it was actually called Blenheim Gossip. There's a place in New Zealand at the top of the South Island called Blenheim, and this Facebook page was called Blenheim Gossip. And they just used to post stuff about people that they didn't like on this particular Facebook page, you know. And people used it in Blenheim. Apparently it was quite a big thing for them to go and check this Facebook page out, you know, to see what the latest gossip was. They had nothing better to do with their time, you know. And so we really need to watch the tongue. The tongue is a very, very powerful weapon. You know, it can be used to do good. You know, when we speak good. I remember years ago when I was only a little fellow, and we were at school, and we all sat there, and then the teacher said, I want you to turn to the person beside you and say something really nasty to them. So we did. And then she turned around, she said, "Now I want you to turn to that person, I want you to say something really nice about them." So we did that as well. And what she was showing us was, when somebody said something nasty, our shoulders dropped. When they said something nice, our shoulders came back up again. Came up, they came back. Just hearing nice things made us feel good inside. And hearing nasty things made us feel bad inside. And the body language showed just how we were responding to these things. And even though these things were happening in a controlled environment, we were being told to do this to one another. So we can see that the tongue can be a healing tool, or it can be a tool to destroy. So we really, really do need to watch the tongue. The next one is to refrain from intoxicants that lead to heedlessness. Now, I often hear people say, well, it's okay just to have a beer. It's just okay to have a glass of wine. Well, the problem is the precept doesn't say that, because they say if I have a glass of beer I don't get drunk. The precept doesn't say to avoid getting drunk. It says to avoid intoxicants that lead to heedlessness. So yes, perhaps one drink doesn't lead to heedlessness, but it's an intoxicant that can lead to heedlessness. Some people use it in their cooking. Well, that's probably not such a bad thing, because I know often when we cook with wine, we tend to burn the alcohol off, and so there's the taste of the wine is left there, but there's no alcohol in it, and so that's probably okay. But then I don't know if they do it here in Malaysia or not, but in countries like New Zealand, especially at Christmas time, right, they make these Christmas cakes, and it's like these fruit cakes, and they actually soak the fruit in alcohol, rum and stuff like that, And I've actually known of people who have eaten a piece of rum cake, jumped in their car and gone for a drive, and they've been pulled over at a random breath testing station, and they've blown positive. The piece of cake that they ate actually made them drunk. They didn't feel drunk, but the amount of alcohol that was in that slice of cake was so huge that they blew over 0.05, and so they got done for drunken charge of a motor vehicle. Even though they've tried to explain to the police, they might get away with it in a court of law. You could go to court and you could fight the case, and the magistrate might just be kind enough to tell you to watch out for your mother-in-law's fruitcake next time. But we need to be careful of alcohol. And I've often said that it's probably the most important of the 5 precepts, because when we start drinking and we decide we're going to have a good night on the alcohol, it's so easy to break the other 4 precepts. They can just tumble. The amount of damage we can do is incredible. I think our prisons are probably full of people who wouldn't be in there if they hadn't been drunk or if they hadn't been stoned, and they've gone and done something really, really stupid. You go to the pub and you get into a fight and you hit somebody, they fall down, bash their head against the bar and die. You didn't mean to kill anybody, but you've done it, because you were intoxicated. Alcohol is the cause of so many problems in the world today. So are drugs. Some people say, it doesn't mention drugs. But I think it does. I think the Buddha, if he'd have known the sort of stuff we get stuck into today, he would have definitely put drugs in there, They lead to heedlessness. The other thing with drinking alcohol or taking drugs, you can't meditate. You know, your mind is too fuzzy to get any meditation practice in. It's not possible to meditate. And the same with these other 4 precepts. When we're just looking at the 5 precepts, when we keep these precepts, we're able to meditate. You can't meditate without morality. You know, when I was being a bad boy, back in my misspent youth, I couldn't even watch television in peace. I would hear a car door slam outside. I didn't know, was it the police for something I'd done wrong? Was it an irate husband who'd discovered I'd been visiting while he was out at work? Was it somebody who I'd harmed and had discovered where it was that I lived? You know, so you walk down the road, you're constantly looking over your shoulder, you're everything, you know, you see a police car coming up the road, you think, oh my gosh, you know, have I done something wrong? So you imagine, you sit down to meditate, and all of these things that we're doing that we shouldn't be doing, the mind will remind us of them. And so it would be very, very difficult to get any sort of tranquility, any sort of concentration taking place, because our minds just constantly remind us of all the things that we do wrong. And so this is why it's really, really important that we try and keep these to the best of our ability. Now I always say to the best of our ability because we're human, we have failings. We make mistakes, you know. And so when we break a precept accidentally, we don't feel guilty. Guilt is a stupid emotion. When you feel guilty, it weighs you down. Guilt is something you hold on to. So when we break a precept, we regret it. It's like, oh man, dang, I broke that precept. And then we just try harder in the future not to break the precept. But, you know, I often say, if you have guilt, it's like having a backpack, and every time you do something wrong that you shouldn't have done, you pick up a big rock or a brick, and you put it in your backpack. And you keep carrying it around in the backpack. And then you do something else wrong, and you go and pick up another big brick or another big stone, and you put that in your backpack. It just weighs you down, you know. So we don't do guilt in Buddhism, you know. We do regret. There's a sense of shame associated with breaking the precept. And with that sense of shame, there comes a sense of determination. We're not going to break this precept again, to the best of our ability, you know. And the more we practice, the easier it comes not to break the precepts. So now moving on to the additional precepts that we've taken today. First one is to refrain from eating outside the given time. Now I know some people say midday, some people say when the sun is at its zenith, which means here in Malaysia, technically speaking, a monk can eat up until about 1 p.m. because that's when the sun is at its highest point. And I've got a feeling that in the Buddha's day it would have probably been exactly the same when the sun was at its highest point, because I don't think the Buddha had a watch. You know. And so he couldn't have gone, well, 12 o'clock, stop eating, you know. So, but we can look at the sun and see when it's directly overhead. And so, for a monk, for instance, we're not supposed to eat until it's light enough. Some people say so that we can see the different shades of green on the leaves of a tree. Other people say when you can see the lines on your hand when you extend it out in front of your face. I had one monk mate, he used to turn around, he'd put his torch on and goes, I can see him. But actually a monk shouldn't be out on the street looking for alms food while it's dark, due to the fact that you can scare people if you come up on them in a hurry, And so as it starts to get light, a monk will go out to start collecting his alms food. And as I say, some places will say 12 o'clock, some places say the zenith. Some places say that you have to start eating before 12 o'clock. Some places say that you can't finish eating after 12 o'clock. There's so many different rules depending on which temple you're in, actually. And then you've got the problem of when you're travelling, when you jump into an aeroplane and you start doing time zones. It's all very complicated. But the actual rule that the Buddha made for the monks was because, I don't know if you've noticed it, but occasionally you'll find a naughty monk. And even in the Buddha's day, there were naughty monks. I mean, there must have been. You stop and think about it. When the Buddha first ordained monks into the Sangha, he put them on 5 precepts. By the end, he had 227 of them. So there must have been some hanky-panky taking place. Must have been some naughty monks around. And so what was happening, as far as the monks and alms food was going, they'd be wandering around sort of like, 6 o'clock in the evening, they'd walk past somebody's house and, oh, that smells nice. And so they'd pop in for a visit. And of course, you're a lay person, a monk's turned up at your house, you're just sitting down to dinner. It's like, would you like to join me, Bhante? Oh, thank you very much. And they were creating a burden upon the laity. And so the Buddha said, no. Said, no eating after midday, or no eating after the zenith. And now we have, some monks will eat 1 meal a day, some monks will eat 2 meals a day. The Buddha stipulated 2, he said 1 is better. Some monks, when they take their alms food, especially when you're eating out of your alms bowl, what some monks will do is they'll have the food in their bowl and they'll eat half of it in the morning and half of it just before the time to stop eating. And so that's still considered to be 1 meal. And so that's the reason why the monks were stopped, because they were just naughty. They just knew who was going to have a good feed. Oh, it's Friday, Mrs. Such and Such should be cooking a really nice dinner tonight. We'll just pass by, And so the Buddha put a stop to that. But we have a tendency to overeat sometimes, We eat out of boredom. I know I used to, if I was not doing anything, I'd just be sitting at home and I'd go into the kitchen, I'd start opening up the cupboards, and I'd just like, I don't know, go to the fridge, have a look in the fridge, and back to the cupboards, And then I'd eat something just because it was there. I wasn't hungry, I was just bored, And a lot of us do that, we get bored and we eat, But when we cut down on our food, it helps in our meditation practice, Because we all know too, after we had a nice feed, it's always nice to have a bit of a sit down, maybe a bit of a lay down. Just close the eyes for 5 minutes. Wake up a few hours later, We've lost an opportunity to practice meditation. The other thing, of course, is even having to think about preparing meals after midday. It takes time, it takes our minds away from the possibility of practice, and it takes our minds into the realms of what am I going to eat tonight? So if you know you're not going to eat anything tonight, then that's something that your mind can't be playing up on, and you can sit down and continue to meditate. You know? And you know, when I see, I mean, they say in America 60% of the American people are obese. And I think in New Zealand, amongst certain nationalities at least, we have massive obesity problems. You know, the island people, for instance, some of the islanders, you'd have 60% of 10-year-olds being obese, you know. Wrong sort of food, too much food. You know. Food's not that good for us. We need food to sustain the body, but, you know, sometimes we just eat so much. And of course, the other thing we have a tendency to do is we eat these really big meals at night time. You know, if you're going to eat a big meal, I think you should do it at breakfast time. Especially when you're working, you know, have a big feed at breakfast time, and that sets you off for the day. Then you can have a smaller feed at lunchtime because you're still not that hungry. But we don't, you know, we have breakfast, we have lunch, and then we go home, we have this huge dinner, and then we sit down, watch the TV, not much exercise happening there, and then we go to bed. And so we've got all these calories that we're not going to burn away, you know, so we get fat. And so we need to watch our food intake. And as I said to you this morning, after we've eaten, it's always good to go and do some walking meditation. It aids in digestion. It's actually very, very good for you. So that's food and why we don't eat so much food. So the next one is, I undertake the rule of training to refrain from dancing, singing, music, going to see entertainments, wearing garlands, smartening with perfumes, and beautifying with cosmetics. In the 10 precepts, that's actually 2 precepts. That's actually precepts 7 and 8. Because it's split up into dancing, singing, music, and going to see entertainments is one of them. And then wearing garlands, perfumes, beautifying the body, and so forth, is another precept. There is nothing inherently wrong with listening to music. Music is not an evil thing to listen to. Dancing is not evil. Watching the telly is not evil. But it takes our minds outside as opposed to keeping our minds inside. You know, we start to chase after these things. You know, so searching through your CD collection to listen to some music. You know, we start to chase after these things that we enjoy. There's a problem I have on Facebook, you know, because you know, I have my Facebook account, I do lots of Dhamma, put lots of Dhamma on Facebook. So of course I don't know how many ever friends it is, and every so often, you know, something comes up on your homepage, you know, Led Zeppelin, Stairway to Heaven. It's like, no, I can't listen to that. I want to. I know what it sounds like, you know, but it's going to take me away. It's going to start bringing back memories of my youth and stuff like that, you know. Because often with me, music has some very, very strong memories of where I was, who I was with, and what I was doing, you know. And so your mind can be taken well and truly away just from listening to music. But as I say, there's nothing inherently evil about listening to music, watching television, you know, watching a movie. But it does take us outside of ourselves, so we're starting to chase things out there instead of keeping our minds in here. And the wearing of garlands, perfumes, all that sort of stuff, well, a lot of that's done for vain reasons, you know. It's pure vanity that makes us want to dress up. And this is why, like on Mukasata days, we have people dressing in white. There's no vanity in dressing in white. We all look the same, you know. So it's not like, you don't come parading in here and, look at my nice dress. Chanel, We don't do that, And so it takes that whole vanity thing away. And so for a day, we don't have to worry about trying to look better, trying to dress better than the other person, We're getting rid of the ego just by the way we dress, The ego's gone. Unless you start turning up with a Versace whites, I guess you could probably do that. I don't know if Versace do whites, but there you go. I don't know much about fashion at all, to be honest. And of course the last one is the high and luxurious bed. People often say, what's wrong with a high bed? It's like, it's too comfortable. When you see a high and luxurious bed, it calls to you, come to me, just for 5 minutes, it'll be okay. You wake up in the morning, you go, I'm going to do some meditation this morning. Well, this is comfortable, I just close my eyes for another couple of minutes. When you're sleeping on the floor, you don't feel comfortable, Your bones are digging in, very uncomfortable sleep. So when you wake up, you're quite happy to get up, and you're not in such a rush. You don't look at the floor and go, oh, that looks comfortable, I think I'll just lay down for 5 minutes, And so a high and luxurious bed is a very sneaky thing, because it's such a pleasurable thing to look at. You just know that, you can lay down just for 5 minutes and it'll feel nice. But that 5 minutes can so easily turn into 2 or 3 hours. And so once again, this is why when we take the 8 precepts, we try not to sleep in a high and luxurious bed. Of course, it's not always possible, for 8 preceptors to keep the 8 precepts, especially the last 3. Sometimes, our full moon days, our new moon days, all of this, quite often they'll fall on a weekday and you have to go to work, and when you go to your job says it expects you to wear a certain amount of lippy, a certain amount of eyeliner, They want you to have something nice around your neck or something like that. They want you to have nail varnish on. And you can't lose your job just because it's an upasata day. And so what we do is we get home after work and we take off all the stuff we've painted on our faces. We remove the jewellery and all that sort of stuff, once we're at home. So as I say, there are certain things that it's not easy for lay people to keep, not when it's occurring during the week. But when it happens on a weekend, it's not that difficult for us to put these things aside for 5 minutes, for one day, for 24 hours. It's possible to put these things to one side. And so I just want to encourage you in your practice today as you keep the 8 precepts. Thank you. Any questions? Yes, well, celibacy, there's no sex at all. Sexual misconduct, if you've got a partner or whatever, then you can still have sex. You just can't be playing the field. You've got to be faithful to your partner. But with the one that we take today, it's none at all. So there's quite a big difference, right? Anybody else? Ten precepts?
I want to know why the 10 precepts, that extra one makes it 10, that makes it
Yeah, it's just that they've split the seventh precept up. One's about entertainment. Yeah. So you've got entertainment becomes 7. You've got gardens becomes, So that gets split up. And then the silver and gold, a monk's not supposed to handle money. Yeah, they can, but it would be very difficult for a lay person not to handle money, for instance. You've got to pay your rent. And depending on whose Vinaya you're using, because Vinayas vary from country to country. So in Thailand, for instance, a credit card is considered money. A checkbook is considered money. They can, however, have phone cards, which I would think would also constitute money. You're still buying a service with a phone card. In Sri Lanka, some of the monks, like in the Gurdwara tradition, Ramanaya tradition, for instance, who don't handle money, they've got this thing they can show the bus driver when they get on the bus, on the government buses, and their vouchers that so the driver can take these vouchers and charge it to the government, so the government pays the bus fare, for instance, of the monks. And in many instances, of course, we have kapiyas, we have stewards. And so if somebody wants to offer money towards a monk's requisites, and so they make the offering that here's some money to go towards if you need new robes or if you need a new bowl or something like that, any of your monk's requisites. And then the kapiya, the steward, takes the money and holds it on the monk's behalf. And then when the monk requires something, you've got to be very careful. He goes, this monk requires a bowl. You can't ask the person to go and buy him a bowl. And he says, this monk requires a new bowl. And then hopefully that lay person understands that he's actually asking him to go and buy him one, and he goes up and purchases it. But it's to stop the monks basically from making dosh. Some monks are very, very good at making money. I've known monks that have built 2 houses for their families on the money they've earned as a monk. So some monks are very, very good at making money. And this is not something that the Buddha wanted us to do. As a monk myself, I need money for travelling expenses, for instance. It's, Air New Zealand or Air Malaysia doesn't give me a free air ticket because I'm a monk and I want to fly to Malaysia from Auckland. So I've got to have a certain amount of money for that. I've been lucky because I've had lay people paying my airfares for me. But even that becomes difficult because they actually say, because there could be an argument that a monk might need to have a little bit of money for travelling expenses. And they say, oh yes, but you can have somebody else purchase your ticket. But actually that's not always that easy, because if somebody purchases a ticket online using their credit card, you can be asked by the airline at the check-in desk to produce the credit card that you used to buy the ticket with. Well, if somebody else has bought the ticket for you, that becomes very, very difficult. And I've been lucky so far, no airline's ever asked me why it is, And I have actually had my friends email me a letter with their ID and everything else explaining why it is that there's a ticket being purchased in my name using their credit card, which I've taken with me each time I've gone to the airport, so that just in case. But it can become difficult when somebody does that. If you haven't got that cover letter, you might not get on your flight because they want to know how come you got a hold of somebody else's credit card to buy yourself a ticket. So there could be instances where a monk might have to handle money, but the monk's got to make sure he doesn't get attached to handling money under those circumstances, because he could very, say, well, this is nice, and then he start to desire more and more money, and then he just moves well away from the Dhamma. Might as well not be a monk anymore, might as well become a businessman.
So it's not necessary for lay people to take the 10 precepts.
Oh no, it would be very, very difficult for a lay person.
So I was wondering how some people told me that they have taken 10 precepts as well. Very difficult.
Very, very difficult, It would be, especially the last one.
Only for one day.
Oh, for one day you could do it.
I think they did for maybe few days or something like that, the 10 precepts.
Well, you could. You could sort of like Saturday, Sunday, for instance, or if there's a public holiday Monday, you could go Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Just make sure you've got enough food in the house, so that you don't have to go and buy something. And so then you could actually keep the 10 precepts for a day. Yeah, that can happen. Yeah.
A retreat with 10 precepts instead of 8 precepts.
Yeah, because you wouldn't need to handle money at the retreat. And if you wanted to give a donation at the end of a retreat, any retreats that I used to do, although we only put people on 8 precepts, of course on the last day of the retreat, we took everybody back to 5 precepts. And so if you took 10 precepts, as long as you went back to the 5 precepts, you'd still be okay. But yeah, if you were doing a 10-day retreat, for instance, it would be very easy to take 10 precepts because your food would be supplied, everything you need is supplied to you, so you don't need to handle money for that 10-day period. So yeah, you could do it. It's not necessary, but you could do it. But the 8 precepts normally would be enough, because you're not going to be handling money anyway, so 8 precepts is usually plenty for any lay person. As I say, for a lay person, even the 8 precepts, it's okay on a day like today, but when you have to go out to work and stuff, 8 precepts can become very, very difficult. I often think, you get some people that have very physical jobs, and it would be very, very difficult to do a physical job and not have something to eat when you finish work. Imagine these guys that you see out there working on construction sites and mixing concrete and chucking bricks and stuff like that. It would be very, very difficult for somebody like that to live on the 8 precepts for that day, because they're just going to be starving by the time they finish work. And it's also, again, with the 12 o'clock rule. If you're going to take 12 o'clock as a cut-off time for eating, well, what do? You say to your boss, I've got to knock off for lunch at 11 because I'm on precepts. Unless your boss is a Buddhist, I don't think you're going to have much success with that one at all, You're going to say, no, lunch is at 12:30. So then what? Now you've only had one meal, breakfast. It'll be very, very difficult as a lay person to keep 8 precepts during the week when you're working.
So the book and silver actually means money.
Yeah, it's translated. No, a monk shouldn't have any jewellery anyway, so we shouldn't have. But yeah, it's the basic thing is translated today as money, But of course, because you've got to be careful. Monks can be very, very clever people, because here in Malaysia, your money's not gold and your money's not silver. A lot of this new plastic ringgits now, So it's like, it's not gold, it's not silver, it's plastic. So I'm allowed to touch it, know,
Or
so...
maybe there is nickel.
Yeah, exactly. You know, so you've got nickel. So, I mean, and that's the thing, and some people are very, very good when it comes to reinterpreting things, you know, so they go, oh, well, you know, five ringgit notes aren't made out of silver or gold, so I'm allowed to handle 5 ringgit notes, and 100 ringgit notes aren't silver or gold, you know, so I'm allowed to handle those. And so there is a reinterpretation of the Vinaya to take into modern society, because most of us don't use silver and gold. And it's the same with credit cards. You know, some people say, well, the credit card's okay. I'm not touching money. But on a technicality, you are touching money, you know. There's still money going from point A to point B, you know. And if you don't pay it back to the bank, you know, you owe them. They say you owe us money.
Online banking is not money.
Well, it is. It is. You're still touching money. You know, even though you're doing it via the ether, you know, there's still money being transferred from point A to point B. And so on a technicality, you know, having an electronic bank account, you know, you're still dealing with money. You're just not physically touching it anymore. But then I often think, well, actually I'm doing the same if I have a kapia. If a layperson has got my money for me, aren't I technically speaking still handling money? You know, is it any different to using a credit card or online banking? To actually get somebody else to collect all my envelopes? I sometimes think that, you know, even that gets pushed out.
Someone else is doing the transaction with everything.
Exactly.
Directly.
Yeah, it's not directly money, but it's an indirect form of money. Yeah, I didn't physically touch the money, but then I could say the same with the credit card. I'm not physically touching money. But if you were going to take the spirit of the Vinaya, then you'd say that you were touching money. If you're going to take the letter of the Vinaya, no, you're not. If you take the spirit of the Vinaya, yeah, you are.
So the 10 precept is not only for the monks. The monks got 200 over Vinayas, but 10 precepts can also be for lay people.
Yeah, a lot of the ones that they call the nuns, not bhikkhunis, but you know, like Sister Bodhi. Novices, definitely, they're on 10, but they're also on 75 Seki rules. But a lot of these, you know, like Sister Bodhi, I don't know if she's an 8 preceptor or a 10 preceptor, but these are the ones that they call nuns in the Theravada tradition that don't have bhikkhunis. And a lot of them are 10 preceptors. The novices are 10 preceptors, but the novices are also supposed to, there's another 75 of the monks' rules that the novices are supposed to try and keep. They don't, but they're supposed to. Yeah.
I read somewhere before saying that even if we didn't do anything, but in our life, because of that is some kind of karma.
Absolutely.
Let's say, okay, that person is right, but I didn't say, but I think
Yeah, it's, you see, thought precedes all things, you know, and so when we think about things, we are creating karma, you know. When we think about things, when we have an unwholesome thought, we create unwholesome karma, you know, even though we haven't committed a deed. There's a story in one of the suttas where one of the Nagantas is talking to the Buddha, and he's saying that deeds and words are worse than thoughts. And the Buddha says, not true. Thoughts are worse than words and deeds. And then he goes on and he says, supposing a Naganta was ill. Nagantas aren't allowed to drink cold water. Right? Nagantas believe that cold water, like if you took it, say, from a river, it can have living organisms in it. You know? And these Nagantas you often used to see, they used to walk around like the Jains. They have a cloth over their mouth and nose when they're walking, and often they sweep the footpath in front of them and stuff like this. So, and they're not supposed to drink cold water, only hot water. So I'm guessing, like, you've got some hot springs somewhere near you. You go to the hot springs and get some hot water or something like that. That's okay because there's no living organism in it because the water's too hot. And so the Buddha goes, you Nagantas, you're only supposed to drink hot water. You're not allowed to drink cold water. I mean, that's right. So he said, okay. He said, supposing, he said, a Naganta is very sick, and the Naganta needs to drink cold water. But the Naganta thinks, if I drink cold water, I will be taking a life. So, and as a result of that, the Naganta dies. So what was it that caused the death of the Naganta? Was it the deed or was it the thought? It was the thought that killed the Naganta. There was no deed. There would have been a deed had the Naganta drunk cold water, but he didn't. It was the thought that if he drank cold water, it would be a sin. So he didn't drink the cold water, and as a result he dies. So the thought is what actually caused the death of the Naganta in this particular hypothetical situation. And everything we do, every deed we do is driven by thought. Thought is the forerunner of all things. And so we can see it's the thoughts that we need to take care of. If we don't think bad things, we don't say bad things, or we don't do bad things. If we think good things, we do good things, we say good things. So we can see how powerful thoughts can be. So, although to think about killing somebody, it doesn't actually carry the same weight as to actually carry a killing out, for instance. But we can see the problem with thought. This is why thought it is considered such a bad thing, or such a good thing, depending on how you're using your thoughts.
Like for example, in killing, let's say the person didn't kill, but he's the mastermind. So who is worse, the one who actually killed or the mastermind, the thought? Because mastermind is the who planned the killing. So it's the bad thought.
Yeah, both of them.
That means that is also considered the bad
Yeah.
thought, which is
Yeah, both of them. If you, for instance, ask somebody to kill somebody else, you are considered to be as non-virtuous as the person who actually carried the killing out. It's as if though you did the killing yourself by hiring or suggesting that somebody else should do it.
But the bad thought is worse because it started from the bad thought.
Absolutely, there's no bad thought
then
when you
that guy
take
will
it
not
place.
kill.
Yeah.
So bad thought is.
I mean, we remember the one about the monk who was forced to disrobe. The Buddha disrobed him because he told the executioner how to kill somebody compassionately. Because according to the story, the executioner was trying to execute some prisoner, and it took 2 or 3 blows of his sword or of his axe or whatever it was to chop the man's head off. And the monk, out of compassion, said to him, "You should sharpen that sword." And the Buddha disrobed him because he actually was giving a suggestion on how to kill somebody.
Even the suggestion is bad.
Even the suggestion is bad enough.
Because the bad thought and the speech.
Yeah. Yeah. How is thought different to habit? Habit is something that we develop over a lifetime, It's like, I was telling somebody the other day, when I was a kid growing up in Auckland, we had this breakfast table. And my sister would sit at this end of the table. This side here was against the window. I would sit here, my mother would sit here, my stepfather would sit here. And every time we went for breakfast, my sister sat here, I sat here, Mum sat here, stepfather sat here. Well, sometimes as a child I was a bit naughty. And it's hard to believe, but I was. And sometimes I'd get up and I'd go and sit in my sister's chair. And she'd come out for breakfast and I'd be sitting there and she'd go, that's my chair. No, I'm telling to get out of my chair. And I'll be sitting there, hasn't got your name on it. And it's like, and she'd get very, very upset because of habit, We do things habitually, we do things, and it's quite funny when you have a look at your lifestyle. Just have a look at, from the time you get up, what ritual you have. You do things in a certain way each morning, It's like I know I used to get up and on the way to the bathroom I used to turn the kettle on because the night before I'd filled the kettle with water. So now I'd turn the kettle on, then I'd go to the bathroom. And then by the time I'd finished in the bathroom, my kettle would be boiled so I could have my cup of coffee. And it was a set routine that I used to do every day, without fault. This is habit. Thoughts will arise here, there and everywhere. Habits are something that we just constantly doing and then often get us into some big trouble sometimes, Because some habits we can bring with us from past lifetimes as well. Well, intention comes with the thought. See, thought is intent. When you think about harming somebody, that's the intention. The intention is to harm. So that's come with the thought. Then we need to change our habits. Yes, habitually speaking, if a person's always been angry, the person has to change the habit of anger, and it's through thought often, it's like you think, I just know this situation is going to make me angry, and then you start to think of ways not to get angry. So you start to change your habit. So it is thought that can make you angry, and it's also thought that can prevent the anger from arising. And so we can change our habits. Just very, very difficult sometimes. We're just so stuck in our ways. It's not easy. Okay, so we have an angry thought, and then afterwards we have a good thought. We still have the karma of the angry thought, but we also have the karma of the good thought, and yes, they can start to, it's like, if I had this water just to here and I put a little bit of salt in it, that would just taste really, really salty. But if I started adding more and more water, I would start to minimize, possibly not get rid of completely, but I could start to minimize the saltiness of the water. So when we do something that's non-virtuous, we can, in actual fact, start to do a lot of virtuous deeds which can start to neutralize the effects, start to lessen the effects of it, And of course we all know the story of Angulimala, who killed 999 people and became an arahant in that lifetime. You know? So I mean, there was a lot of very virtuous things that he was doing in order to overcome the karma of taking 999 lives. So yeah, we can definitely neutralize it and overcome it, you know. But even when we look at the Buddha, when he was the Buddha, we see that he suffered the pain when his foot was cut, for instance, from the rock, and Devadatta tried to kill him. You know, we know the pain the Buddha was in on the night of his parinibbana, you know, after eating his meal. You know, he was in a lot of physical pain. We know that 3 months earlier he'd already decided he was going to give this life up. We know that there are other stories in the Vinaya where the Buddha was quite ill, quite sick. And a lot of this, even though the Buddha was an arahant, he was the Buddha, a lot of these things that he suffered were residual karma that still had to come to fruition. But because he was the Buddha, there was so much virtue there that it wasn't as bad as possibly it may have been, you know. And I was saying the other day, you know, sometimes, because we don't know, karma's a big thing, karma's such a huge, you know, we could probably do Dhamma talks on karma for, you know, the next 50 years and not cover it all. So I was saying the other day, you know, when you're walking in your house and you're going, you know, you've got a big coffee table and you go and stub your toe on the coffee table. And people say to me, well, is that karma? So, might just be not watching where you're going. But you know, if we treat it as karma, it's a good thing, because see, what we do is like, you know, well, the first thing we do is we don't get angry because we stubbed our toe. It hurts. There's pain there. Ow. But we don't get angry. Stupid table. The table's real stupid. But we get angry, we start swearing. Now we're creating non-virtuous karma by being angry at the table. But we still have, because it's the anger that's, you know, where the karma's coming about. So I often say to people, you go and stub your toe against the table, think to yourself, oh, maybe that was some non-virtuous karma from the past coming to fruition. You know? It's gone, it's finished. You know? And so we treat it, because we don't know, you know, if it was karma or not, but if we treat it that it might have been, then we actually get quite happy, you know. It's like, you could have broken your leg, that would have been worse than stubbing your toe, you know. So it's okay, so this could be residual karma that I had to get rid of, you know. And when you look at it that way, then you don't get angry. You know, excellent, you know. And so you don't create any non-virtuous karma at this stage. If there's no more questions, I think we better call it quits. Otherwise I'll be found guilty of keeping the monks waiting for their lunch. Akasata Chabumata Devanaga Mahidika Punyang Tam Anumoditva Chiram Ragantu Loka Sasanam Devo Vasatu Kalina Sasa Sampati Otucha Pito Bhavatu Lokocha Raja Bhavantu Namiko Idame Nyatinam Hotu Sukita Hotu Nyateo Imina Punya Kamina Mame Balu Samagamo Satam Samagamo Hotu Yavva Nivana Patiya Kayena vaca citena pamatena ayakatam achayam kamami bante